Welcome back to Middle Fingers Up. I'm your host, Carine Abou Dahab. I said it today, all because of my guest encouraging me to. So today we are talking about sexual health, particularly in our immigrant communities. And maybe with my lovely guest who inspires me, we may even get into our own isms because we're both on our own journey of unpacking as being children of immigrant parents. This topic of sexual health carries so much stigma, and you guys know this. We all know this, especially if we have kids. We know it even more so. But I think the thing we have to remember is that it carries a lot of stigma, yet it touches every part of our lives. And who better to have this conversation with than someone whose work is centered in breaking down these taboos. My guest today is Carine Abou Dahab, a sexuality and relationships educator and sexologist, who has spent over a decade working with immigrant parents, people in the sex industry, survivors of sexual abuse, and countless others navigating relationships and self-discovery. You might know her from Nuances, and that name says it all. She doesn't believe in being in the whole black and white thinking. Instead, she leans into the gray, the complexities, the nuances of human sexuality and relationships. So I think it's a good time to bring her on. Carine, before I welcome you, I just want to start off, did I get your name right? And if not, please let's get that out there and make sure it's done well.
Thank you. Carine, and the last name is Abou Dahab.
There we go. Perfect. I had it all written out. I'm like, I know I'm going to butcher it, so I will just make sure I check in because you and I have talked about this. Names are so sacred where we come from. And over time, people butcher it enough that we start using it in the same way that they do. So I want to make sure that we have the space to make sure it's said right. So thank you.
Thank you.
Now that we've done that part, let's talk about your other name, Nuances. Can you tell us a little bit right off the bat, like what that means to you, why you chose it, and what are you hoping people will take from it when they come over to your socials and get to know you?
You've expressed it very well, actually. Given the company is young, it's going to hit its second year in May. I've been doing this for well over 15 years. And every time I come with my own agenda or I have my own black and white thought, somebody throws a wrench in it. And I was like, oh, okay, I see, and the more I'm unlearning to learn, because like I'm thirsty to learn as well, the more I'm like, there's no way anything makes sense anymore. Right. So it's really inviting the people to come tell me, and I'm able to also help them deconstruct and understand, that those binary thoughts are not always what's helping us to do, and to be a little bit kinder on ourselves and to understand, I can live with both feelings. I can live with both realities. I can live with so many things at the same time and validate this one truth about myself. And I love it because it also humbles me in many, many, many ways. And like I said, even that wrench that's thrown in, I get to learn something new that I didn't see coming, and that you don't learn on the school benches, and you don't learn, anywhere else then until you have these conversations with people.
Yeah, it's like taking those risks and, being okay with, I think I was talking to a friend about this yesterday, that it just, the older we get, this ego of ours just sort of takes over, and sometimes wanting to talk about the isms with others, and others may feel too, like if I don't know everything about it, then I'm too afraid to even go in and ask because I don't want to offend, or I'm going to say the wrong thing. And sometimes that's a cop-out. Sometimes that's protecting ourselves. And, there's all these other reasons why too. But I think it's so worth going in and even asking, did I get your name right? Obviously I feel bad if I didn't get it right. And then sometimes that's a reason why we step back and we don't want to ask because we don't want to offend. But I think it's like super respectful to go there and talk about some of these things. Why don't we
Yeah.
start with you? So how does a first-gen child of immigrants decide to take on the one job that so many of our parents would look the other way and be like, what are you doing going and talking about this? So I'd love to ask you, as close to the beginning as you can get of your own story, what drew you to the field of sexology, and how did your personal experiences shape your approach?
So it's a little bit of mix of both, right? So there's definitely the personal experience that led into the profession, not knowing it even was a thing, unless I think the only person I knew was Dr. Ruth.
Oh,
Like that we used to watch, and I was like, my God, this old lady, right? I'm sure she was young, but I was like a child looking at her on TV, and we're like, we can talk about things like that. So I was always like enamored a little bit by her, but definitely. And I'm going to say, like, there was instances of sexual abuse as a child, and coming from an immigrant family, we don't talk about it. It's very taboo, and hopefully you'll forget it, right? And of course, being a woman, that too has those added layers of sexual assaults and abuses that we tend to also accept sometimes as a way to be like, it's okay, whatever, we're at the club, we'll let it happen. It's okay, this and that, and there's other instances where you're not so much ready for it. And then there's the immigrant factor of constantly being touched and modified. Sit down, be pretty, cross your legs, go wax. Are you going to do your eyebrows? There was always something that needed to be fixed and tended. And those are realizations I just made recently also of it's not just anymore about the sexual abuse, it's the constant trying to fit into the mold of what beauty is, right? Even with my curly hair, we had to straighten it. I still don't know how to straighten my hair.
Did you iron it too growing up?
So initially mom has straight hair. So I remember as a child, I don't know how she ended up here, but as a child, she brought me to, I guess it was a braiding school. So we had all these Jamaican and Caribbean ladies, and they would always do my hair and braid it. And I don't know why we stopped. Maybe cost, maybe I never even thought of that. And then when I would get somebody to straighten it, I would cast the iron also on top of it to make sure it was extra, extra, extra straight, right? But living in Canada and then in Montreal, the humidity is within 20 minutes, it was done. So, and I never gained the patience to do it. Like I would try, but by the time I got to I was like, I can't, right? So like I said, it didn't matter how pretty or beautiful, people were still telling me to fix myself. So these are under layers of messages that were completely unconscious, minus the very overt one being the sexual abuse. And indirectly, high school, I was like hitting themes of like the double standards of women's sexuality versus men, what AIDS are, and how gay men, like even in high school, like they got upset because I was talking about gays and distributing condoms. It was a private school, and I was like, but it's December 1st, International AIDS Day. And I remember I had to choose a college, because here in Quebec, we have the choice of after high school, you had 2 years of college and then you have university. That's for us, it's called CEGEP. And I was like, okay, I need to think of my university to be able to do certain things. And I remember it was either I wanted to go in fashion design or sexology. And when I found out that sexology was a thing, I was like, oh my God, like this is interesting. Like, let me see. So I leaned into that because I thought, okay, Quebec is the only place that has like a bachelor's, a master's at the time. It has a PhD level now since 2012. Probably the secular, non-religious view in North America. And let's see what it goes. I got accepted. I'm a dropout of CEGEP. So I got accepted. I was like, I didn't think that would be a thing. And ever since, it wasn't easy, mind you, for multiple reasons, but it definitely hit a nail on that passion of like not necessarily sexuality, yes, sexuality, but how I view the human way, how we navigate life, how we're raised, how like it's not just about the penis and the vagina anymore. It's about how I was raised as a woman, and because of all of these, I navigated possibly some relationships that are not necessarily healthy, right? And how we try to navigate the virginity aspect of life, and then you're like, wait, but I can have sex, but wait, why can't I have sex? But wait, can I wear a tampon? Because they're making it for teens. So why can I not put a tampon? What does that impact my virginity? So you have all these things that are impacting us constantly every day in these small decisions, and we don't even realize how that is part of human sexuality, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's why I say, you were talking about ego just a little bit earlier, and I was like, man, I always get surprised at how people, the older they get, the more stuck they are. Where I'm like, man, the older I get, I was like, I know nothing and I want to know more.
Mhm.
Like, I'm definitely leaning in, versus I get shocked at that fear and of not knowing and being stuck in certain things, and not wanting to unlearn and
Yeah.
basically like do that waltz with life a bit.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I get my anxieties too. Like, I'm not perfect.
Yeah, well, I think that's the whole lesson in life, is like, how do you navigate it, understanding that we're not perfect and yet we strive for that. Can you tell us a little bit about where your family comes from and your heritage? And I think it'd be really important for us to, I learned some really interesting knowledge about, being from the Middle East versus there's a different way to actually approach that. And I think it'd be really cool for all of us to sort of get a little lesson from you, or even in this conversation, just where exactly your family is from. And maybe that'll help us understand what all of the sexual health and sort of meant from your community, because my community is similar, but there's always differences as well.
So my parents are born and raised in Egypt, and my grandparents also lived most of their lives in Egypt. There is also a lot of like what I call like the Levant and the Ottoman Empire, right? So I have one side that has Turkish and Armenian, and I'm assuming they had fled the genocide, and they had traveled to Syria and then back to Egypt as well. Same thing with the Syrian. I have a grandmother who has Syrian ancestry as well, and the family probably had to leave because of the wars that were happening and the slaughtering. So we don't, and I do thank a friend for that, because I was like, I had heard Mina, which is Middle Eastern North African, but until I met that friend, and I'll do a plug and shout out to Habibi, please, Mo, he taught me Swana, which was Southwest Asian North Africa. And why that term started to become more important, it was understanding how colonized it was. We're Middle Eastern to whom? Right? And it was a Eurocentric point of view, versus when you're looking at an actual map, we're Southwest East. See, I still get flustered with the word Southwest Asia, North Africa. And I was already starting to decolonize my approach. And sometimes I knew I had something right when it felt like some people were telling me I had it wrong. But owning that term and understanding like how colonization, imperialism, and everything sneaks up, like I was aware of it, but then you're realizing it even more. And then I remember telling you, I'm grateful for Gaza, as in that liberation that they're allowing us at the cost of many, many lives. And it's not to remove the pain at all, but there is definitely that veil that's been lifted for me also, and to understand a lot of our history and a lot of understanding. And even so, when you look at how colonization and imperialism had impacted, I'm very sure even in your own history of the country's history, there are things that were like, wait, this was here way before the church said something. This was here way before the white man came and said these things. And now with their own control, they have inserted themselves into that. And one of the biggest things we can see is in India, the third sex. It's always been, right? I learned that a pharaoh, for example, possibly was transgendered. And then come to fast forward in the 90s, there was an Egyptian transgendered actor. And you're like, oh my God, like it's here. We just don't want to deal with the discomfort that it's always been here. Yeah, in multiple places, even in Islam. And I do not read the Quran. I will say this right there. But there was a book that really lifted that aspect of saying the beauty of sexuality within Islam. And it was written by a woman, and the interpretation of it, I was like, oh my God, like even my own like fears and judgment about what Islam was, and you're reading how beautiful like the writer perceives what sexuality is. And then I was like, okay, I clearly got that wrong on that sense. What other faith am I getting wrong? So I'm not reading the books, but I am reading articles and books from many other theologists that bring in that positive view of what sexuality is and not the shame of it.
Mm-hmm. And I think the word shame is like the one that probably comes to a lot of our minds, the silence, the shame, and the fear around any of this sort of health talk. My best friend and I were even talking on the phone yesterday about our first conversations with our parents and those that were around us when we got our periods. And she was at a Khalsa camp, I was at home. And it's such interesting responses because our moms and our family members, everyone before them really were taught this is just something you keep on the hush and you deal with it in the most simplest way, which is focusing on hygiene and cleanliness. And that's about it. And so there was all these mixed messages that not only from our own community we would get, but then I think from society as well. And, you and I have talked about this before too. It's really fucked me up because here I am, like you said, so later in life, kind of learning a lot about this. But I think you made such a good point about there's never such a terrible time to go back and relearn. And I think just because I'm in my 40s and we're at this place in life and we think, oh, this is what I know, I'm so glad that there was some kind of calling within us to go back and do that work. And it's not done because every day I'm like, oh my gosh, now I know this. And the fear of contradicting ourselves or the fear of offending our community, all these sorts of things start to come up when we're sort of unpacking these things. And I guess for me, my question to you is, how are you kind of keeping your spirit or your shining light sort of continuing to shine as you learn some of these things that can be really difficult to take in when we've been taught so many things in a different way?
I've always been impressed by my gut feeling. And I haven't often listened to it. And when I did listen to it, I was like, really? And then you're questioning it because you're made to be told as already as a woman, you're questioning yourself constantly. And then add the layer of being women of color. There's a whole other navigation to do in the Western culture. And I've noticed that the more unlearning I do, sometimes I find myself in a lot of grief and in a lot of sadness. And it's hard because trying to find, I do part therapy, but even trying to find a therapist that has those sensitivities is not always easy. So you're going to try one, you're going to say it, and then you're like, okay, no, that's not it. And then you find another one, you're like, okay, I love what they do with that, but I'm not still finding that validation that I need to process this emotion. So I could only therapize myself, to be honest, right? So it hasn't been easy, but I find that I'm learning. And I felt like that was always the right way to go, is to show authenticity or to name it. And sometimes, you're scared, and because you're like, okay, I'm going to get rejected again, or I'm going to get put in my place. And sometimes I just get mad.
Yeah.
I get mad because I deal with injustices on so many levels on the daily life that I'm like, how can people not see? And it's not just injustices of what the sexual violence or domestic abuse is. I'm talking about trying to get an appointment at a doctor's, or having a doctor not listening to you because they blame you on your period, or not listening to you because, Black people's skin is thicker and they shouldn't feel pain, or sometimes it's because it's our own culture and they shame us and judge us. Yeah. And tell us what the right path should be. So I'm always in a weird sense of like grief, sadness, anger. And then I'm just always hoping that when I do my conferences or workshops or trainings and even therapy, it's just like, as long as how do you say it in English? In French, on dit semer les graines de réflexion. So you're putting seedlings of reflections. I can't change anything. But am I able for you to reflect in another way, to be like, maybe, and hoping in 15 years, you'll be like, okay, that's what she said. Like, I
Yeah.
remember now what she said. I think a lot of it also comes, there's been a lot of unlearning in the last few years. And part of it comes to tending to all these little kids that would have needed somebody. And it sounds, I say it and I'm like, okay, I swear I'm not that egotistical. But at the same time, it's nurturing that inner
Yeah.
child of myself. That's why I find it so hard to distinguish nuances. I can't. My brain can't necessarily distinguish both, because if I wasn't open to unlearning, I wouldn't be able to unlearn my own and discover all these layers of pain or pride, or even discovering myself, because you're, again, told to shut up and be pretty. So you have to please the other. You have to tend to the other. And you're like, okay, this is how I have to be loved, right?
Right.
This is how I have to be accepted. Okay, this is the way of doing things. And when you stray away from that, it's like, oh, okay, no, that's not it, because now, but I feel crazy. I thought that was the way. No. This is the white way.
Yeah.
This is not our way. And this is like, okay, and learning, like, okay, so the white way wasn't my way. I was right. Okay, but can I? And navigating all these platonic relationships, professional relationships, medical relationships, all of these relationships are impacted by how we view life. We're talking about decolonization, but decolonization we come from cultural, right? Communities, like this is what we're from. And I think there's a deep hurt that we lost when our families made that best decision for our lives. Because I understand, I'm not here to blame, but there was, I almost sometimes call it an amputation of, where's my community, where's my tribe that's there, and you're like, you can't find it.
And then it's like hard to trust yourself sometimes, because
I'm
like
constantly questioning myself.
everything you're saying, I'm like, are we like twins? Because you say it so well. Like I'm still caught in the emotions, and so sometimes it doesn't come out so well. But the way you speak about it, I think so many women like us listening are going to feel some kind of like exhaling moment of, oh, okay, like, because we don't get to have these kinds of moments or conversations to really talk about the grief and the sadness. And it's scary sometimes the way it can come out in conversation or in thought and whatnot. And sometimes you don't even want to bring it up to your own, close-knit group of people, and you can't help but feel isolated. And then it's like, well, I don't want to be my own victim. Like that's not what I'm trying to be. I chose to unlearn some stuff and know that. So then you're like, who, what, where, who, what. And so it's painful to be in my own skin sometimes, to be honest, because I don't know, I'm like, can I wear someone else's skin for a minute? But at the end of the day, it's like, I don't want to do that. That's not what I want to do. I want to be in this place. And so hearing you talk, there's no answers to it, but just the familiarity of what you're saying brings so much, for me, my own validation and exhaling moment of, oh, okay, this is okay. It is the gut that I've let down. And I was telling my husband this the other day. I'm like, I wonder if I need to do like a year of being sober from my friends. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, just no friends. And he's like, you can't live like that, Carine. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't think I'm good at making friends. I really don't think I know how to do it. And I don't think I've done it well, because I see my, group is kind of dwindling down because of, all the isms and stuff. And so it's like, do I trust myself to make good decisions and building, friendships and things that you would teach children to know how to do? So when you're living in your own head and not trusting yourself, like, I'm sure you've been there. What's that like? Can you speak to that? How do you rebuild your own trust?
It's honestly, it's so, and you too, you're hitting a nail for me. It's so hard because, again, and I didn't know what was going on. I left like a really bad toxic work environment. And then there was unlearning the trauma until I went to go work for a woman of color. And I was like, holy shit, wait. I was right. My gut was right. I didn't understand what white centrality was until I left. I was like, no, I was right. it's so weird because now there's this, again, this unveiling that's happening. These little things are happening, and you're like, okay, wait, like, is this happening? And I wasn't well. I was really not well. Since 2019, multiple things had happened. Some were the worst, best things in my life. Some I'm still very much, the wound is still very raw for me of grieving that people pleaser part of myself and understanding that I was unconsciously doing certain things. And it still comes up. I'm not saying I got rid of it. It's still very much here. And then understanding that some people are more comfortable with the people pleasing part of me than they are the more raw and authentic and wanting to connect. I'm like, fuck, man, I've connected more with Carine, um, more than I did with somebody that I've known maybe for the last 5-10 years. I was like, this is not what I want. I want this.
Yeah.
I want to be okay to be like, yo, this hurt, this cut, this made me cry. And I am very aware that I am censoring myself to a certain point, because now fear is coming up of like, oof, what if they hear this? What if they do that? And I'm also holding back tears. So in the aspect of being almost a little bit vulnerable to be transparent, but that fear is there because I was like, I've already lost so much. And I was like, can I take more loss? And some people might not see it that way. Some people might say, well, you caused it. Some people, and I'm like, maybe, yeah, I do have some responsibility and accountability to take in certain actions. I just, wish other times that other people, and it's very hard for somebody like me who views platonic relationship a little bit more than the romantic relationship. I've noticed that that's been a core value of mine, those platonic relationships. I've seen these more valuable. It's not that I wouldn't love my partner, like that person's not there yet, but like I wouldn't not do it, but I see the value in women friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Western idea and the white way of seeing it is not what we've known. We look at gossip as a way to put down somebody and to create triangulation and to create de-othering and to create all these aspects to push one person away to feel, a certain way, versus gossip, when you really look at the root of it, was a survival tool for women.
Mm.
Right? Don't go to this hairdresser. They're the one who's abusing. Don't go there. You know what? Are you going to take the bus? I'll be with you. Let's go together. So with that patriarchy coming in, they've made us believe that gossip was bad, versus it was a way to connect with your community. And again, we don't want to gossip to harm. We're gossiping to survive and to connect, right? When you talk about your child, you're gossiping to reach that connection and to be like, in a sense, without saying, I need help. It's this is my reality. And the person's like, oh my God, this worked for me. I don't know if there's another word that I can use for it. I was like, yeah, we could have conversations, this and that. But the root of gossip was survival for women.
I never heard of that way, because it's don't do it, right? It's so bad. Parking lot kind of conversations and things like that. I mean, in the way that we've built it up today.
Patriarchy and white supremacy not wanting us to understand it.
And that's just the thing. So like all these now just even the topic of gossip, like this is a thing when these doors keep unlocking for us and we start to see things for the way they are. It's so hard sometimes, because it's like you can't unsee it, and
you can't see it.
Nor do you want to go back. You're in a different place now and there's no going back. And that there's comfort in that, but then like you said, there's also like fuck because I've only known that one way or those ways, and yeah, they were toxic, they didn't work and whatnot, but that is all I've known. Those are clothes that fit me, and now I'm trying to fit into these new clothes that fit weird or uncomfortable or whatever, but they're actually better for me. It's better for me to recognize these things and learn these things. And yet it's hard because sometimes the people around you, they're not there yet, or they're not getting that. And so then you can't help but feel, well, I'm the problem. As you said before, it must be me. I can't make good friends. I'm the issue, and I know we're not privy to other people's, whatever they're talking about us, but sometimes that hounds us too with those toxic relationships and strings we've kind of cut off. You can't help but sometimes wonder, what the fuck are they saying? They must be thinking she's crazy. It's all her. I can't believe she's doing that, or she's gone too far. I've actually heard that from friends. You've gone too far now. And you're like, fuck, if this has gone too far, then how can you and I continue to be friends or be in a relationship or whatnot? Because my too far is my reality, though. This is the truth of who I am and where I'm at. So it just continues to, I think, confuse, and sometimes the battle is within your own self, and those are the biggest battles when you're only with you all day. So I think here we are talking about this conversation, and people listening might be like, well, what the hell does this have to do with sexual health? Well, this is exactly what you said. That's one part, that's the surface, but there are all these, it's an iceberg, right? All the things below connect us to exactly where we started off of why we're talking about sexual health. It's not just hygiene.
That is a very important thing you did bring up. What does that have to do with sexual health? I see it as a spectrum, right? It's a full spectrum, and you could look at it also from the intersectionality point of view, right? Sexuality has more to do with oppressions, but once we also understand where we stand in our dimension world of sexuality, is that. So I have 6 dimensions. I have the biological and the physiological, right? So that has to do with every bodily function, the bodily development, the sexual and reproductive health, like what we study, like in puberty, when you're going to get your period, how we make babies and all of that, right? Then we have the cognitive and the developmental part of it, right? Everything that has to do with the brain. So what is the sexual information you've learned and acquired? What are the socio-affective and social-sexual abilities you've learned? What is the language? One of the things I say often enough, we use words like, oh, you're wee-wee, your little flower, and I was like, wait, like, so we're infantilizing this, or we're shaming it. We're like, oh, the private parts. Instead of saying, oh, the penis, like your arm, like, yeah, okay, you have a penis, that's cool, and normalizing that language. But when we use the private part, we also invite shame, secrecy, right? Again, what did we get? You were talking about periods, for example. I got my period, I was 9 years old. I didn't know what the heck was going on. Already it's it's young, right? And I didn't know what was going on. And Egypt knew before I did that I got my period. Like, I got my period, but I didn't know what it was. And the funny joke around that, sorry, I'll do a sidetrack because that's how my brain works, is when I got it, my mom has a very light accent when she speaks French, which is fine. So we talk about menstrual cycle, and in French, c'est les menstruations. Even I have it sometimes where it's not the menstruation, it's monstration. Monstre is monster.
Okay.
So in my head, I was becoming a monster.
That's very symbolic.
And then I was just told to put a pad on. And I was like, and then what? Like, I couldn't understand what's going on. She's like, this is going to happen every time. Put a pad on and deal with it. You're like, okay. So hit the psychoaffective part. That's another, this is where we'll learn. Were you taught to self-affirm, boundaries, expression, or were you pushed to go kiss your uncle and aunties? Did you feel some self-satisfaction on the emotional? Could you express yourself? Could you express your desires? And desires, look at broader than just sexual. I want to play with this doll. And I'd be like, no, you can't, go to your room. So even when you wanted to express a desire as a child, you may have been punished for it. And again, this is where the heart is. You have your sexual identity and orientation, and where we find pleasure and sexual wellness. Then we hit the sociocultural. What are the cultural practices? Okay. In our world, we don't have sex before marriage. You shouldn't, it's heteronormative, right? So very man-woman, you shouldn't talk to boys until you need to get married. But how you're going to navigate these relationships, right? You're supposed to know nothing until you're supposed to be in bed with this person, right? What are the laws surrounding that within here? So, and I covered that part also on the dimension of being ethical and moral. Is maybe here in Canada, abortion is legal, for example, but look at the States, what's happening. Another part of it is that, and I try to use the States as much because we look at like other brown global South communities, and I'm like, no, it's happening in the Western world as well. So child marriage, there's over 30 states in the United States of America where child marriage is legal. Nobody says that.
Yeah.
Nobody acknowledges that. More than half of the states have legalized child marriage. And I don't think it's going to get any better if this keeps up, right?
Yeah.
We have gender stereotypes in your social cultural, what women should do and what men should do. not what about partner and community should be doing. Family and peers and sexual behaviors, right? Do I have a family that's a little bit more like, cleavage wise and funny and, or no, we need to cover up and almost like a Mormon, and it's not to shame, it's just to give an example. We cover up, we're a little bit more conservative.
Yeah.
Then you have your relationships. And this is where relationships, everybody talks about romantic relationships. And I expand on it. I was like, no, you can't have a romantic relationship if you don't have friendships, if you don't have family relationship, if you don't have a relationship with yourself. And nobody has taught us this. Nobody. We're only starting to do that. I've been doing it, the last 15 years with students, and I'm starting to tell adults about it. What is your relationship with yourself, right? How do you communicate? Can you communicate? What is your seduction, intimacy, interpersonal conflicts, and difficulties? And then we have ethical and moral, which are your values, beliefs, principles. What are your choices, your sexual rights and responsibilities, and what is human dignity and respect? And within these, this is a little bit of an older version. As I'm reading it to you, I was like, I don't even take into account, maybe in the cognitive developmental, I might add the neurodivergency aspect. Maybe in the biological, physical, I might add this physical disabilities, for example. Doesn't mean that, you have, so there's so much to it that we have to acknowledge that once you start understanding it this way, there cannot be a binary anymore.
Yeah. So when you highlight how this is more than just biology, and you've broken down in practical terms what that means. So, and as we've talked about in many of our communities, we're taught that curiosity about, all of this in particular is shameful. Can we talk a little bit about like what are the consequences of that silence, and how are we breaking barriers, or maybe we're not even, and we need to, like, what's the thing to do, or that you are finding is helpful about this?
So we could obviously say the consequence of silence is being vulnerable to violence. That's probably the biggest extreme. Now, the levels and the degrees of violence will vary from person to person. But if we look at so many, I think I was just watching a documentary yesterday about some type of church and how they were protecting the pastor around it, right? And the pastor had the police that protected him, and accountants and the board members, and you're listening and you're like, oh, we have 12 known victims. Like, there's no way there's only 12 known victims and somebody who had a 50+ year career. Silence, because again, it hits you in so many ways. So Punjabi, I believe, if I'm looking more, and again, my knowledge may not be updated, so I invite you to correct me at any point. There's a lot where it's similar to the Middle Eastern, is that we're tended to take care of our elders, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just taking care, it's shut up. This is going to be your job.
Mm-hmm.
This is expected of you. And at this point, it might even move in with your in-laws to take care of your in-laws before you even take care of yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And your parents yourself, but if you're the only daughter, that's what's expected of you. So you're taught to minimize and diminish yourself because you have nothing else but to become that caretaker and that housekeeper and that mother. Who is the woman? Who is the person that gets to experience? Who gets, what, do you like chocolate or do you not? Or were you told to like chocolate? So when you're subscribed into this role and you're seeing that your whole community subscribes to this role, it can be validating and it can be uncomfortable at the same time, right? Because if that's all you've known within your community and this is where it feels safe, that's fine. But if there's violence now and abuse, that's where it becomes problematic. You didn't cook the meat wrong. I'm going to throw a shoe at you. We're going to put you away in a bedroom for this. And then you have the uncles who might take advantage and now sexually abuse. But because it's shameful to talk about it and you bring shame to the name and you bring shame to the family, you will be punished for that. Not only by the direct nucleus family, but your whole community.
And obviously not all, but this is definitely, it hits home for many. Even a lot of what I saw growing up was much of that as well. And I've talked about my own experience in previous episodes about my own sexual assault that I've received on more than one occasion from different family members, and starting to have recollection of some family members that I didn't even realize. So, you're kind of, as we get older, it's interesting how our brain can unlock things for us. And a lot of us received that abuse when we were so young, in hopes that we would not remember these things. And it's interesting that sometimes there's a correlation with things like, for example, I have an anaphylactic peanut allergy that I got at the age of 2. And my mom remembers at a party, I came running to her. My face was all swollen. And, that's kind of when we started to realize it. And I've been unlocking that now and wondering what caused my body to flare up that way. And why do I have this allergy? It's interesting. And so these are things that I think I hold sacred with my own kids, and my poor kids have been taught from day one about danger, and you don't have to hug the family members or what, because some of these people were expected to be, right, respectful members of our community. And many of them were in our temple too. You have these sacred, safe spaces on one, and it can be both. It can be a safe space and it cannot. Like you said, we have to understand it's not black and white. And so there's a lot of this unpacking that people from our communities are starting to do, sharing their stories, writing the books, making documentaries, getting out there, because if we don't, as you said, kids bring out our innocence. And I think the future, these are the ones that we are trying to protect and help break the cycles for.
Definitely. And like you said, right, it's community can also be a good thing, right? So, where okay, now it's known, let's have the community gather and support this child, right? I do believe and again, I don't know the tribe, and I've seen this somewhere where they were saying, like, if the child makes a mistake, the tribe will gather around to support it and to say, like, we're here for you, right? But then they've done universal researches where, like, well, the Greeks used to do it and the this used to do that, so, like, that's okay, like, as if child sexual abuse was a thing. And I was like, well, they did a universal research on a nomadic African tribe as well, where they were like, let me see, like, they know nothing about the science or the research or about anything at all. So when they talk to the kids, and the ritual is basically I can't remember, and trigger warning, but I know semen of the elder men were drank. And when they asked the kids, and they were like, so do you feel proud? How do you feel about having gone through this symbolic movement? And the kids were like, I didn't like it, but I have to do it to be part of my village. A human with no tribe will not survive. Mm-hmm. We are made to be with people. Look how long it is for a child to grow and to be with their parents, right? You look at other animals, they're within like 5 minutes or walking and up, and they have to tend to their own survival. Mm-hmm. We're made to connect and to be part of a community, and it's trying to figure out how we can now make it safe. But because we have power coming into play, and we don't have that honest to good of taking care of one another. And I'm saying care, like deeply, honestly care, not just like go eye mask crystals and go drink it. Like, it's nice to have that. It's generally nice to have that, like to have that drink and relax and numb yourself. But there's validation and emotions and tending to that we're not doing for many of us. And for me, what the other part is, and you're saying, I had these good memories, I have this. I want to add, as a child of immigrants, you have that guilt. That guilt, especially when I got a burnout, was very real to me, because it was like, fuck, man, my parents left their country. They came here. They had to build a life from scratch. They need children. They had to, to the point where they want to give me the language to learn for me to assimilate so properly. And how dare I get a burnout with 7 hours work days and collective insurances and a retirement plan? And how dare I? Why? Because my parents, even when they came, there was a nucleus that followed. Back then in the 70s, Egypt had special visas and Canada was one of them. So there was a nucleus of Swana communities that gathered. And I could generally recall the amount of times throughout the week we were always children together, people together. There wasn't, and I'm not judging here, really not judging to parents, but there wasn't necessarily a restriction in bedtime. Mm-hmm. It was like, and Europe is still a little bit like that. Like, I think Spain is a little bit like that, where it's the child that follows the parent's rhythm and not the parent following the child's rhythm. And that can also be very, very isolating. Now, I don't want to generalize. There are needs that are different, of course, from different children and realities. But when I come to talk about that community and that cultural aspect right now, and I think it was so obvious for me during COVID, where it's like, oh, that we lost it. It's been gone.
Mm-hmm.
And our parents had that moment where we are like still floating about.
Yeah.
Like, where am I? Where do I belong? I thought I belonged here, but I guess not. Like maybe no. And I again go back to isolation. And what happens to isolation? You feel lonely. You feel like you don't belong. You don't connect with other people. Maybe your romantic life is not that. Or you want to do the opposite and the extreme. Your isolation will make you have more dangerous behaviors and connect because you need that touch and you need to feel something, right? Whether it's real or not, you just need to feel. So you might have more risky behaviors or you might accept any type of love because you don't know. You've been taught a certain way, right? Your family will structure how you might see future partners if you don't unlearn these realities and biases. It is very important. And the peanut allergy, yeah, there's a lot of research that says trauma could definitely be, and it could also start from the stomach from mama. We don't know how stressed she was when she was pregnant.
Mm-hmm. That intergenerational, and I think there's so much new stuff that our generation has a privilege of learning to try to break these cycles and teaching the future ones. I really think it's important in how you've been, as we've been talking, really making it clear, like there is no blame. And we're not wanting to respond with the kind of shame that we've known. It's learning, and this is what unlearning is. And there's good and bad and ugly and all of that. And I think sometimes our elders feel their own level of guilt and shame with what the fuck. We look at what we raised, or we didn't provide that safety, or we thought we did, or and I think everyone's on their own journey. And I with you want to recognize, like, we were given opportunities in ways that our families hoped we could have that they couldn't. And in that time, there wasn't the knowledge that we can have now with newcomers that are coming. And, there's societies and communities that are built to help newcomers in a certain way. But there's also a whole little episode that we need to do on old comers and newcomers and the whole pit against, the whole model minority and all of that, right? So, but that's another day that we can get into that part. So it's just like you talk about one thing and then you're like, but also let me add a little disclaimer in this because it's not black and white. And some of the experiences that you and I are sharing aren't what all South Asians and everyone from your community has experienced. And I think people have to understand that too. Like we can't generalize as well. We have to understand people's story. And that's the thing that I think a lot of us are learning is go back and learn our genogram, go ask the questions and the things that we can about our story, whether it's for our health or our mental health or just understanding our ancestry and what that was, because we don't all get the opportunity to do that. And when we do have those conversations with elders and whatnot, it's more doors open and more understanding of why our families lived in that survival mentality.
It's and definitely it's going to be weird to say it that way because it took me, I thought it took me 8 months, but it took me a good 2 to 3 years to heal from the burnout. The emotional intelligence and the unlearning is that we've reached a certain level of survival that our parents have not had the privilege to get. Mm-hmm. We're not stricken by war. We are definitely stricken by other realities. But this is a whole other level to understand of like, okay, there is definitely a collective pain here, but we have time to process. I cannot go to a Palestinian or a Yemeni or let's process your emotions if you're still in a state of survival. There's not that. It's okay. You've come to Canada. How can I help you now survive? We'll process this. There are services, but you need a housing, you need food, you need, right? And this is coming, and many Indigenous communities have always said it and screamed out loud. So I sometimes struggles with my own elders because I have the oppressed oppressors. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of that colonial mentality that comes on, where French was a better language. And when the English came, and I was like, what about the Egyptians? They had their own beautiful thing, you know? So it's interesting sometimes to navigate even these conversations, because I'm like, because I'm so unlearning and I'm trying to be like, okay, from which perspective is this conversation coming from? I find it very hard sometimes, because I do want to learn the history, but I have to understand it in the context of where they're coming from, where they colonized at this point, what were they fighting? Okay. And I look at history, I was like, okay, fuck, okay, the English came and the French came and they did this and they wanted to fight, but then the church came and fucked it up even more. So, and we're even removing our own indigenous beliefs because everything's so muddled up.
Yeah.
Everything's so muddled up, and to try to undo and detangle and this embedded mush that we have in is very hard. And especially when it comes to sexuality, because and people always ask me, oh, are you for pre-sex, before marriage, or after? I'm like, it doesn't matter. That's not what I'm for. I'm for you to make the decision that belongs to you, that feels safe, and you communicate your needs. But do you know what your needs are? You know, there's do you even know? And then people are like, wait, no. Do I feel equal? No, I don't know. You know, so it's really not an obvious thing to do, but it's acknowledging these weird moments that we go through.
Do you have advice or feedback or kind of your own observations, even when we talk about our own oppressed, doing the oppressing, like anything that you've seen sort of be helpful when we're trying to respectfully challenge, our own family, our own community members? Anything stand out for you in what's helped for you to ask a question or sort of have that conversation where we can be in that room or in that moment together and work through that, hopefully coming out of the other end understanding a little bit better? It's
hard because the want to belong, and that's the oppressed oppressor, right? That need to say, like, I'm part of the clan. And I'm saying more from that in between, like, people of color, not so much the Black and Indigenous, like that weird, you're lightly darker than me. So I fall into this weird, like, what is she? What does she do? Is she like, okay, no, I know she's not white, but what is she? You know? And I code switch when I speak in French. So I can have a great Quebecer accent. So people are like, oh, she's one enough. But my beliefs cannot be that. I cannot navigate this. But to go back to it, it's just so hard to navigate. So when I'm in a more personal setting, I get angrier and I get inflamed better, because I always have to be professional and speak well and present well when I'm in these professional settings or these white settings that, like, I have to sell myself even more, because I have to prove myself even more to say, like, I'm not just a sexologist. I'm all of this and more, and I see what's going on. But at home, I do tend to get a little bit more inflamed, because I'm like, fuck, man, like, here too? Like, don't you see how the system is fucking you over? So it's a very good question, but it's so hard to navigate. But again, I'm talking about immigration, because right now that feels like the safe part of it. Yeah. But when I talk about, like, gays and trans rights, especially in a Swana environment, oof. Yeah. And then it's like, no, it's always been here. It's been in our culture. We've had these realities. Why is that not a thing?
How do marginalized people not understand other marginalized people? Like, sometimes I wonder that too. How do we have the most understanding? The sad thing is, a lot of people look to marginalized people when they talk that way. So if I'm talking poorly about the trans community, white people will take that and totally use that in other ways, as will my own community members. I think it's weird and it's not okay when we talk about our own pain, but then can't recognize the other woman sitting there or the other person sitting there that is also going through their own journey of pain in such a similar way, but it's because they're gay, or it's because she's Muslim, or it's because he's Black.
It hits levels on so many ways. But once again, you find the words and you understand it, you're like, oh shit. So I just learned the understanding of triangulation. But the white triangulation is pinpointing marginalized communities. So you have the triangle, you have the white, and you have your two marginalized communities, right? And then it's like, I'm going to use this one to oppress this one. So I'm going to do whatever I can and use that topic to oppress this one. And this is the bigger picture, but it happens all the time. It happens all the time in professional settings and personal settings and all the time. And you're like, once I understood the term, I was like, I was right. It's like,
Yeah, your
this
gut.
was you're feeling, and you're like, no, 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 people don't do that. People do that. They don't do that, whether it's conscious or unconscious, right? It is happening. So that's one way of the colonizers to come and pinpoint and to do this. These are so deep within our traumas and in our subconscious that sometimes we don't even know it's there.
Most times we don't know it's there. The person that maybe you would hope would recognize it, it's so embedded. And I think that's an invitation that we are asking people to go back and lean into that, go back and look at that, go back and learn all the history, not just one part of it, because though even just reading up on that, I think can open the door a little bit and help people a little bit. You'll talk to someone, whether it's a friend or a family member or what, and you can see how deep it's in there. And then for me, where I go immediately is, well, I don't want to say something because who am I to say something when all my life, all I wanted to do was be white. And I only just woke up a few years ago and realized I'm brown. So start to discredit yourself, right? And so you start to think, well, I don't have the right to speak up right now because I sucked at this too. So we stop ourselves in those moments when we could have had a really good learning opportunity.
But that's how it's the system is made to be, to make you question those and to make you feel less than, and to make you say like, I'm working on a new post, and it's understanding also so I did the medical experimentation about like how it impacts, right? Because people are like, it's not true, it's not happening. I'm like, what do you mean? It's still happening. Like, people are still saying that the medical system is still educating people that Black women don't feel as much because they're thicker or something. It makes no fucking sense. And now I'm looking into how therapy, the psychology, has been a tool to oppress people of color. And I think I don't remember the term, but they had a term for the Black slaves that were crazy to wanting to run away from their masters. There was a medical term, and I'm quoting for those who are listening to this. And there was a term. It was like, well, they must be crazy to wanting to run away from their slave and the plantation and their masters. So again, in therapy, there's also that sense of, oh, you must be crazy for wanting this. You must be crazy for thinking this, even though you just realize, no, you're the crazy ones. And it doesn't make sense, because even when I sit down with people and they have dissociation, you could see that this fragmentation did happen due to trauma. And it can happen multiple ways, right? But it doesn't show up. Man, I remember years ago, I had a man, and he's like been using heroin and cocaine for years and dilaudid. And he was in his 50s at the time. And I'm hearing his story. And then you hear about the Youth Protective Services. He used to beat him. She sexually abused him. The father used to beat him. The first person who showed him drugs was his teacher. And you're like, and the whole time he's like, yeah, I'm a piece of shit. Oh, I don't think you're a piece of shit. He's like, well, why am I doing this? I was like, well, that kind of is obvious to me. You're seeking some refuge, right? And that's why people are like, it must be rewarding. It fucking is not rewarding. It's not fucking rewarding. I'm not a sex therapist. I've worked within the community. I was a street outreach worker, and I've had the privilege to learn from the suffering of other, right? And this is where I say it's humbling, because again, you show up and you think and they don't teach you any of this. I don't know what the new program is, but when I was there, they didn't. It was already a racist setting. I hated going to school. The proudest thing I got was my bachelor's. Like, honestly, the grit I had to survive in such an environment I'm very proud of myself, and I'm still realizing the levels of racism that was there. And you're put out in front of these realities that you're like, oh, fuck. Some of them are sex workers because they love it and they make the money. Go, yeah, I celebrate you. And some of them have been exploited, and they're like, I need to put food on the table, and this is what's going to tie me over. Same thing for drug use, and same thing for homelessness. I've seen people who were wanting to be in the streets because they were over it. There was no safe space for them. No safe space for them to accept them as they are. Or they've been abused, and now they're just threatened by the system, and they're like, I can't trust anybody, and you're like, okay, let's just go grab a coffee and give you something to eat. So that's why it's community work is still very important to me. It allows me to offer part of my services and knowledge for free. I'm getting paid as an employee, but for free for some people who may not. My family would have, first of all, never gone to therapy. That we never did for my sexual abuse. And if they did find a specialist, it's already a sexologist. Given in Quebec, it was known. It's not known to us.
Mm-hmm.
And that is free and of color back in the 90s. So allowing to have that access and having a boss who is supporting the fact that, okay, no, I'm going to choose my cases. Don't give me any of the cases. I'll choose, I don't want to say more complex, but more in tune to who's not necessarily going to follow up with the help, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the conferences, because I do want to make people aware of their biases and professionals. Like an example, and you share as much as you want to be comfortable. If you choose to, there may have been some mental health difficulties for you in your life at some point.
That's what led me to the mental health profession.
And did you go see a doctor?
Actually, to be honest, no. It was me, myself, when I had one of the traumatic events of being sexually assaulted. And it was when we were in India, and I had told my family, and, they did the best they could to manage that. So when I came back, I actually went to go see my high school counselor myself. Yeah. And just to be like, I'm not well. Like, I don't feel good. I'm not well. I don't know what the fuck's wrong with me. Like, so and those high school counselors were really meant to help you with your academics, not really with this, but he did the best he could.
At least he was a welcoming.
He was. And it's funny, his name was Mr. Payne, which I always laugh at, given his name. I have to say, I was grateful for how welcoming and open he was to have the first conversation. And then as I got older, I was able to seek my own therapy later on. But no, we didn't know to go to a therapist. If it was anything that we ever needed about our health, it would always start with the doctor. And that's kind of where it would end too. Yeah. There wasn't any mental health supports or services that we knew of or that we ever accessed.
So that's that, especially with the older generation of medicine. I definitely see the shift a little bit more, but not so much in sex. There's still this weird part concerning sexuality. But I celebrate you and you're a younger person to have done that. I thought I dealt with it until, like, again, 2 years ago, and you're like, oh, I'm still here,
Yeah.
So one of the issues, for example, I talk with people who might have some mental health disability or diagnostic, is that you show up to your professional, which is a psychiatrist, a doctor, whatever it is. And this could apply to many levels. I'm just using this as an example. You show up and you're talking. This person will automatically say, oh, well, this sounds like, it's as if they're checking the list of bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, this and that, right? And I'm saying it not to minimize, it just feels very disregarded because they see you for 15 minutes. Pretty much. And right. Then you're put on a medication. All of this, nobody tells you the side effects of the mental health difficulty you're going through, how that will impact not just romantic relationships, your friendships, your social life, your body. Let's talk about postpartum, for example. I bet you nobody spoke to you about how postpartum will have an impact on all these realities on you.
If I can add, I actually had this conversation with a family member just over the weekend. When you go and get your child's immunizations with public health, the nurses here, they ask you about postpartum. And my nurse, she was a white lady, and she had already made very inappropriate comments. And she had her back to me when she was getting the vaccine ready and asked me all these postpartum questions. And I remember sitting there, and I probably had postpartum because I had a lot of emotions coming out towards my son and me and all that. I remember sitting there, I was like, fuck this bitch. Like, I will not tell her anything right now. I do not trust her. I do not feel comfortable, but I need help because I knew something was up and I was curious about it. I knew enough. I went to school. I knew enough that postpartum could likely happen. But when you're in it, you don't know, right? Because they chalk it up to hormones.
So very vulnerable.
And like, oh, you haven't slept. It's your first baby. You know nothing. But I will always remember that right there was a beginning of like questioning this help that we're all supposed to get. And, you know, if I was like about to kill myself or my child that day, that would have gone really poorly, because I would have had a visit with the public health nurse who would have said, well, I asked her all these questions and she said no. But the way that they tend to you is like literally you are just like a questionnaire. That's it. Right. And so it's too bad, because for some women, that's all they have. That's literally like I had a community. My mom lived with us for months. I was very fortunate that I was able to work through if I had postpartum, but most women do not have that kind of access. And that's how we're being asked.
And you bring up, it's the sense of feeling crazy this whole time.
Oh, so yeah, totally.
The add postpartum being its own problematic difficulty, but you're not taken seriously. And the darker you are, the less serious you'll be taken.
They even talk to me at the 6-month mark, like, you can feed your child some of your own Indian food. And I was like, again, go fuck yourself. Like, that's what the middle fingers are, right? I walked out of there like, fuck you. Seriously. You know, and then my husband got it too, because he had to go one time. She must have been
proud. She felt inclusive.
Yeah, I was like, thank you for telling me that I can fucking feed my child whatever the fuck I want. And anyway, my mom's my health nurse. She will help me figure out, you know what I mean? That's who I'm going to go to for all this help or whatnot. Thank God I had her. But yeah, and I'm one of how many, you know what I mean? And my stories are nothing in comparison to what so many of the women have to not receive when they need it the most.
In the Western world, our infrastructure is made to isolate us even more. What does that have to do with sexual health? I'm isolated. I can't connect. I can't have honest, true relationship, because I'm like, okay, well, now I have to go to work. I have to do this. I have to take the bus and I have to do this. And now I'm too tired to connect and have activities. When I look at children, I've again worked with teenagers for so long, whether or not they were part of the system. And you're like, okay, this is real, right? And we're getting more and more angry teens, specific boys. Well, first of all, poverty is not helping our cases here for youth joining violent organizations. We've done good when it comes to feminism and women taking a little bit more space. I'm not saying we fixed the issue, but what happened is that within a generation or two, we were able to almost achieve equality. We're not there, but we kind of left the boys, the male privilege, assumed that they were always going to be okay. And we didn't take them along with us in that growth.
Can I circle back to the teens for a second? You've worked with like thousands and thousands of teens in these health workshops. Like what would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions or gaps in knowledge that you've encountered when they show up?
Oh my God, there's so much. Yeah. Because there's so much on depending on the culture you come from. A lot of my classes were definitely multicultural, which I loved so much. The last workshop I did with teens was about 1.5 years ago. And it was when Andrew Tate was a few months before he got arrested in Romania concerning the exploitation of and the sex trafficking of women. And Andrew Tate was definitely one of the biggest images that boys were attracted to, which I thought was terrifying. And now, again, he's coming back in the news, which scares me a bit. So you have media. And I'm saying media, Instagram, TikTok, because the problem is that with your algorithm, you're feeding it. So the more you feed one theme, the more the algorithm's going to feed, and the more it'll find a more attractive source, right? So now we're having this reality happening. Then you add the easy access to porn. Nobody talks about how ethical porn can be an option. I'm not here to shame porn, but now porn, because it's free and it works a little bit like YouTube, it has to do with views. So what happens is that them too are going to do the same thing as the algorithm and try to show you images are a little bit more violent or a little bit more excessive or a little bit, right? There is ethical porn out there, but a teenage boy will not be able to afford that, or a teenage girl. So now you're looking at porn, and we're not just looking at the behavior now being done, we're looking at the body parts. Mm-hmm. So now you're getting young boys with body dysmorphia of, I need to build muscles, I need to do this, I need to look like this. Why does my penis not look like that? And you're like, bro, you're 14 years old. You're not done growing here, right? So there's that aspect. Then there's young girls who are like, well, I have too much hair. I need to remove all of this hair. And you're like, no, you don't. It's fine. You can trim. You can take care of yourself. That is okay to do. You don't need to remove it. And then they get ingrowns. And then there's pain. And then They're not using condoms. Why are they not using condoms? So then we have this reality of happening. In Quebec, I don't know how it is in the rest of Canada, because they removed funding from STI, sexually transmitted infections. What occurred was we've seen, it was already on the rise, don't get me wrong, but chlamydia and gonorrhea again went way more higher, as if it hadn't gone up since the last 15 years. This is where it becomes interesting. The first contact of visual sexual images is starting earlier. The average age is about 9, 10 years old, right? I'm a sexologist. Sometimes I do a Google search and I'm like, oh, okay, wait, not the words I wanted to use. I need to reframe. The exercise for the listeners or for yourself is Google schoolboy and look at the images, and then Google schoolgirl and look at the images. And you could see how just simple words like that will shift what you're receiving on the internet. It is quite uncomfortable. So we're having this aspect. Then we're having the aspect, I remember I had a nurse call me and she's like, how do you deal with teen ED? And I'm like, oh, maybe he has diabetes. She's like, no. And I started to hear this young boy couldn't get an erection because now the partner he's with, her body doesn't look like the porn actresses. She's not acting like the porn actresses. Nobody's talking about these under layers of that. Their first sexual experience will happen, whether it's a kiss, whether it's a hug, whether it's an erection, it will happen. It's how healthy and safe can we make it for them? I show up, I'm only there once, maybe for an hour, 75 minutes. And again, this is just reflection seedlings that I'm giving. I'm hoping the teachers will listen to me and apply. But again, a math teacher is a math teacher. It doesn't mean they're comfortable approaching this topic necessarily. Mm-hmm. But it's everywhere. Even the games that some of them play, right? Yeah. It's like Jessica Rabbit 3.0 at this point. You know, she's like the waist, the boobs, the hair, the lips. I'm going to go back to the beginning when I told you my family picked at me. And again, with love and care, that's what they thought they were doing to be accepted. Waxed, hair straightened, and be pretty. So these voices will come and play with us in our insecurities and to be like, okay, wait, like, okay, so I'm not pretty. I'm not good enough. I'm not this. And then, you know, and these voices keep playing, and to fight this.
Yeah.
And these internal automatic thoughts is very hard. I'm saying as a woman, but we all have them. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We all have them, you know? And again, shout out to men who don't have the space to talk about it and don't feel safe. And even more so the men of colors that feel that they have to answer to this role. And again, I do want to say one thing, and it's not to remove the suffering of the LGBTQ community and those more so of the BIPOC community, because the more I sit with them, the more I'm in awe of their authenticity once they're out. I look at them and it makes me teary-eyed because I'm like, I want to be like, there's a certain sense of freedom they have that I can't seem to achieve or find. And I don't think it didn't come with no suffering or no vulnerability and no loss. Many are very probably lost, many family. But that freedom sometimes that I see to be authentic as they are, is for me, it's like, oh, it's beautiful to watch, right? And we're always in that balance that we were naming.
Yeah, yeah. It definitely brings out your own confidence as well of like, okay, this is a space where I can try to practice some of that too.
Actually, yes. So right before Christmas, it was so interesting. Right before Christmas, I had fishnets, and I would never wear fishnets if it wasn't for Halloween or like, I don't even know maybe if it was a sexy time moment, right? And my friend organized it. It was welcome to all the communities. It didn't matter. It was mostly aimed at SWANA communities, but whether you were straight, gay, it didn't matter, right? And I was like, man, I love my gay spaces because I don't want to like fetishize anybody. It's just safe. I put the fishnets on. I put the shorts on. And it, for me, it's just that. It was like, I'm not shamed into being a whore. But the second I had to walk down the street, I closed my coat a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I put my walk a little bit more because I was wearing heels, right? I became very self-conscious about it versus at that moment when I was in this space, I was like, oh my God, like I feel good. I feel good in my womanhood, right? Yeah. At this moment, there's something to learn when it comes to sexual health and communication and respect respect a lot from First Nations and LGBTQ2S communities. Even the BDSM community has a great consent when it comes to sex, right? So
even
there's no
ethical monogamy, is that what's it called? Ethical
non-monogamy.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to be around people that are practicing ethical non-monogamy and learn about this, and it's like very, very liberating to hear people talk about the way the consensual part of the whole lack of cheating and the trust within your partnership, and finding a way to be able to be with your person for all these reasons, but also not being tied to monogamy. And it's a whole different world, and it took me a minute to wrap my head around, but I appreciated the people that were around me to teach me about, oh, okay, this is interesting. And so allowing me to ask all these questions. And I walk out of there and I'm like, I have a lot of respect for people that are part of a community where there is this, let's get it all out on the table. Let's talk about this, and before we interact in any other way. And it's almost like when you meet someone new or build new friendship, you want to ask them, like, have you been friends with a racialized person? You know, have you dated someone of color? And what does that really mean when you do that? Those are conversations that I've never actually had with anyone. My husband and I met 1,000 years ago and have been together for 1,000 years. My friends and I, we've never had that kind of conversation, because it is the whole fetish thing. And then you feel connected to that. You know, you think that's the thing that you're connected. Oh, they love my culture. And so I thought, oh, this is really cool to be able to be part of a community where, yeah, like, let's get it out on the table so that there's no weird unfinished business. It may not work for all, but the folks that I've had the opportunity to talk to, I'm like, that's very interesting. So there are ways to truthfully and respectfully work through things that we've been taught we can't. And we've been taught one way, and that's the right way. And so a lot of people are breaking those sort of one way, right way, and showing that, okay, this can work. This is possible.
Definitely. Definitely.
Can I go back for a second, just ask you, just to wrap up with the young people, like, is there feedback or advice that you could or would give to parents who maybe are struggling to talk about some of these topics with their kids?
So there's so much, people ask me, when should I start talking about it? And I'm like, oh, the second you're born. And then they're, what do you mean? I was like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It's not as bad as you think, right? We're talking about how to build a safe attachment environment, first of all, to allow your child to understand what are safe and healthy relationships. It doesn't mean safe and healthy you can't have disagreements. You can have disagreements, but how do you repair that disagreement is also very important. When we're talking about children that are under the age of, like, let's say under 3, we're talking about simple books about body parts, about what, like I have so many books I can pull out as well after. What is love? What are the different types of families? What are, depending on the reality you're trying to achieve. And it's so simple as well. We tell children that are born male to stop crying as of the age of 4. As adults, when we cry, we need a hug. We need to be validated. We need to be supported. And you're asking a 4-year-old to strap it up and be like a man? Like, this is already problematic, right? So this is the emotional impact that we're implicating on children, and we're asking them to repress emotions. So at this point, then there's, of course, that natural body discovery, right? Young boys will feel the extension that is the penis, and they'll be like, what is this thing? And we're playing with it, and they're discovering. So it's not necessarily shaming it, but, it's like, hey, this is your part, and this we do in the bedroom. We don't do that in front of people. Only these people can wash you or see you. You can't go to the doctors alone. If it doesn't feel right, come talk to this person, right? Often enough, I tell parents, try to build a network of at least 5 people. And I understand if you don't have 5, at least 2 or 3, outside of the nucleus that is family, right? Even if you're separated, it's just outside of that. So which auntie, for example, you would trust their judgment, even if they weren't to tell you what's going on. So I have a cousin, she trusts me. She's like, all 4 kids can come to you. You don't need to tell me. I was like, okay, sometimes I give the updates, or I'll ask the young kids their permission, but they're allowed to come talk to me with any issues that they feel comfortable with. I have another cousin who's like, no, they can talk to you, but I need to know. So I'm like, okay. So I listen and I'm there to support, and I give the big lines to that other cousin, right? So I'm blessed to say like that auntie privilege is there, but is it a family member? Is it the counselor at school? Who is it outside of the family nucleus that can be at least a first step to have a conversation? It doesn't mean necessarily that you're doing a bad job. It doesn't mean anything. Sometimes you're the person we're scared to lose the most, that you might be the last one, or sometimes might not even know. So as parents, we're so terrified to lose that last love,
Yeah.
that we receive, that we don't want to face this. So who are the other safe individuals? But if I don't know what safety looks like, everything's going to be mixed up, and I will be vulnerable to predators. There's definitely that aspect. And I think I commend you on the fact of, you don't have to say hi to everybody. What I tend to say is that there's so many other ways of saying hi. It doesn't have to be the kisses on the cheek, right? It could be the high five. It could be a thumbs up. It could be, what do you want? It could be a wave. I respect that. Like, I have a hard time. I'm definitely triggered when it comes to saying, like, people saying, go kiss your auntie, go. And I'm like, no. It's okay. Just hi, And then they're confused because they're like, no, that's a polite thing to do. And I'm like, I don't care about the polite thing to do. I want this person to know that they have a choice with me. I'm supporting the child's right to have that body autonomy. And body autonomy is just simple as that. Is, where can I say hi? Where can I say no? Because then I can start trusting my body. We've been removed of that as children. And that's the silence, and that's the grooming that parents are doing unwillingly sometimes. I'm not saying they're asking for the kids, but they are, when you force your child. Because when that happened to me, I was like, the first thought was like, well, I don't want mom and dad to be mad at me. I don't want to be rude. Because this was what inculcated in us, right? To be pleasing, to be polite, to be quiet, to unseen, right? And if you were hurt too much, you were either hit or put to your bedroom. So there was a physical complete extraction of your community to put yourself in the bedroom. So that is hard. And this still lives in my body, by the way. Like, I still find myself shutting down because I was like, well, I have nowhere else to hide. I'm going to shut down, right? Because you've completely removed me as a child and put me away because I thought I did something wrong.
That is like such a big point that you just made. And how does it show up in your body? Because I think sometimes we automatically think, oh, sickness or hives or what, but how many people do that? Shut down from the conversation or from the people, or ghost people, like, I'm done with you or what? And there's a reason why some people don't do that and some do. And I think that's the part about going back and learning a little bit more about our own childhood and how it's impacted us and showing up as adults. Because if I'm in a marriage and I'm someone that is shutting down, then that's going to also impact my partner. If I have children, that's going to impact them. So it's like, it's to my benefit to sort of look at that, realize that, work on that, or make it known and stuff. And I just think such a good point you made, because there's so many of us that people will call us sociopaths, right? Like, you're such a sociopath. And you think, oh, fuck, what's wrong with me? Yeah, why do I always shut down? How come my friend can communicate so well? But sometimes we don't realize where that's coming from and what that's about.
That's for everybody listening. That's why it's important to get some trauma-informed care, and even more if they're part of a multicultural aspect, right? Because often enough, people who have found their voice have been heard. There's a sighting that said why it was aimed at Arab women, and they're like, why do Arab women? And I think it could be for Italian or Greeks, and I don't know how it is in the Punjabi culture when it comes to that. Why are they so loud?
Oh yeah,
it's like, because we're never heard, so we just up and we don't listen to each other. We keep. And I see that's another part that'll come up to me. It's like, no, I want to be heard. Stop gaslighting me and shutting me out. So that'll come up too as well, right? So I have these conflicting areas in my life that are very much present, and so it's interesting navigating this.
Yeah.
So these are one of the realities as well. So you're taught to be submissive, for example, to be polite and to respect authority. So when you're in front of a doctor, you have to respect authority, right? So which can put some kids at risk as well of abuse. In front of a priest, a pastor, a temple leader, there's multiple things that can happen because it's an authoritative figure. But this is also tools of colonization, to shut up, to use, to be, they're very much present. Now, coming up to what we're talking about, sexual health and all of this, it's okay if your belief is no sex before marriage, no sex, but it doesn't mean that the person you have will follow that life experiences and that life journey. And this is where it's important for the parent to go beyond their ego and beyond the community's judgment to be supportive of your youth. Because what's going to happen then is that if throughout these years you haven't been supportive and you've been shaming, and I'm not guilting you, it's the only thing you've known, by the way, right? So the child will turn to other people and might self-medicate, might self-do certain other behaviors that you're like, but what's wrong? You had food on the table, you had a house, you had this, you had that. But it's not that. It's the repair, the safety, the listening, the validating. So when we look at sex education, people are always like, how do you put a condom on? How do you do this? And I'm like, yes, this is great, but how do you listen to what a boundary is? When somebody tells you, well, I wouldn't wear a condom. No, you don't trust me. I love you. You don't trust me. I would wear a condom. And then the person's like, well, no, I know you love me, but okay, wait, so I'm going to lose you now because I'm going to make you, that again, we're adults. I've been put in situation as an adult and I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I'm 12 again. Like, what is this? Like, I'm like, this is getting me. So imagine being a 12-year-old who doesn't even have the tools. Well, 12, 15, 8, 17, we're fully aware. Your brain doesn't stop developing until the age of 27 if you're neurotypical. If you're neurodivergent, we're going up to 35. So the frontal lobe that makes those decisions, that thinks, that takes time, has not developed. But again, a 12-year-old versus a 35, we're not even on the same league at this point, right? So there's how we speak, what we see on TV. How often have we sat there in family conversation where they're like, well, she asked for it, oh, you deserve, and you're like, oh, okay, so if I do this, I asked for it. And this is the Western world, right? When we look at our women, for example, where they're submissive, they're this, and we're no better, either judgment or no better to do these things. So it's to be mindful of these biases and these fears, because a lot of parents are scared. And I do want to support you in your fear because you weren't taught these things. It doesn't make sense. It's a lot. Plus you go on the internet, and again, the more you feed one algorithm, the more it'll give you another reality. And you're like, holy shit, what is that? Yes, the numbers are high for sexual assault that are declared. You can't heal from it.
Very true.
It doesn't mean that you can't have a family that will love you and support you. It doesn't mean, it's just we have to go beyond these cultural things that we've been taught, mostly through colonization, and these are big words. I don't show up and do a workshop with these words. I'm just aware of it as a professional. And this is my ask to professionals, is get yourself, keep learning, because what you learned 15 years ago is almost not as valid as what's happening right now. Be sensitive to the intersectionality and to the cultures, and realize that you don't know, and it's okay. And I love when I have a workshop and they get to participate, and with teenagers, by the way, because I don't know all the terms. So then I get to learn their language. I'll be like, and I feel like I'm a cool 40-year-old all of a sudden, right? It's temporary, but it's like, hey,
Yeah.
I don't talk like it because I know it doesn't come out naturally, but it's nice to see them teach me something. There's pride in it. And I'm telling you, your kids have something to teach you. You just have to be willing to listen and not react, right? Another way to have conversations, and this is what I tell people. Often enough, the car ride, there's no like direct eye contact, right? I don't know if you've heard it often enough. And it's like, go for a walk with ice cream, and it doesn't have to be like, let's talk about sex. It's try to find these topics in their daily. How was your day? Me and my friend, this and this happened, and I saw that she wasn't happy. Oh, wasn't she happy? Well, he gave her a hug. I was like, well, did she want a hug? I'm like, yeah, she wanted a hug from him, but not from him. And you're like, oh, okay. Like, how do you think that comes up through? And there's conversations that occur every day that you can both learn. And if you don't have the answer as a parent, that's okay. Because the goal is you're showing what safety is for your kid to come and talk to you. And it's okay not to have the information and to say, you know what? Good question. I'll either take a moment, maybe we could look it up together, we could go to the library together. Let's find a resource, right? You're giving tools to your child to look for these things. So it's just going over our own discomforts and fears when it comes about that, right? And I could go on constantly about this topic because I feel like I want to take care of the parents so that they're able to take care of the kids. I always think of the children behind my ultimate goal. And I always tell parents, I'm not here to change anything. I'm just here to give you as many tools that feel and fit right with you.
But it's so possible when we have a village and we have people. Like, I remember I would never go to my parents about anything that would make me feel embarrassed. But I had young aunts and uncles that we lived with or lived down the street from. And they not only gave me so much knowledge on pop culture, but I knew who I could go to talk about the weird, embarrassing sex thing or the uncomfortable thing. Or even if I'm mad at my parents, I can go to my aunt or my uncle and they're not going to, rat me out, but they're going to be there in the moment to talk me through and usually also encourage me to go back to my parents and, as well. And so I really appreciated that because my husband and I were able to build that for our kids. Like, as cool as we think we are, we're their parents. And I know my oldest will talk a lot about the sexual health stuff from school, but and I expected it to be the other way. My youngest is like, I'm not telling you anything about that. And so, okay, well, who will you tell? And so thankfully, they're very connected to my brother and they know they can go to Kemamu. And so it's like, okay, this is good that we don't have to, as parents, have the pressure of doing everything and being everything for our kids. Our job is to be their parent. And there are so many people around us, or one or two, that can provide the things that our kids are just not. No matter how much we try to be open, they're not going to come to us for everything. And as parents, like, we can't know it all. We can't do it all. And certainly not if we've dealt with, a lot of our own stuff. And so having people in our community around us to share the load is like amazing, amazing. My sister is another one that my younger one, he sometimes feels like a middle child. And so my sister is the middle child. And so he is so connected to her and he will sometimes not even let me talk shit about my sister because he's so connected to her. But he knows he can go to Serena Mussey for so many things about me, to learn about me. Can you tell me why my mom does this? Or how did you deal with my mom when she used to yell at you, right? And I'm like, okay, this is what we want. As much as it sucks that you guys are gossiping about me, you're really trying to find a way to, right, carry out the lines of communication. And I love how you talk about that. Is that's all we can do, is try to open those lines as much as possible with our kids so that they get some understanding of how the world works with them in it.
For me, when you're talking about your child going to go see your sister, for me, I'm hearing, oh my God, your child's trying to find a way to connect with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Totally bang on.
And it's not even about, so again, the gossip, that's the positive side of gossip. It's like, okay, mom's annoying me, this and that, but really that child is trying to figure out who mom is in their own way to see how they can connect with your person. And I think that's actually really sweet versus the fuck my mom, fuck this, I'm gonna run away and leave, and then and probably have a sister who might not be as supportive of that sin and call youth protective services because XYZ, right?
Yeah.
It's hard because I keep saying we, especially us who are navigating these two worlds, who are saying the again, I call it the white way or the Western way. And then you're seeing our background and ethnicities and cultures that are coming with it. And you're like, well, what's the right way? And then you're like, well, there's no right way. What's the right way for you and your village and your community that feels safe? And this is where it's navigating this, right? It's trying to unlearn generational trauma and then seeing people who've, not that they don't have their trauma, but they've had freedom of space and, that like I said, the whiteness centrality was there prior, and now we're in this weird in between growth of, we're trying to catch up on what safety looks like and taking space while healing, while understanding. So even when you're triggered, I think it's okay to name to your child and to show that vulnerability, because people don't realize that when you're a parent, you're the first model to your child. You are what a relationship would look like between parents, whether you're married or separated. If you're separated, I encourage parents to celebrate the other person's birthday, not necessarily to go and have cake, but to be like, hey, it's your parents' birthday, give them a call, they do a lot for you. Let's, love them, and show that there can be health in separation, for example. When there's a discord within a married couple, for example, I talk about repair.
Yeah.
We need to show the example. Some people had absent fathers and they don't know what that is. Maybe mothers who were surviving and they were screaming a lot, and they just didn't have time, the mental load between paying the bills, feeding, trying to find a job. It's a lot. So, you have a child that might be a little bit more high strung and nervous. Their nervous system might be a little bit more elevated, and they've tried to tend maybe and let me try to fix things right away, for example, and nobody's there to care. And I will not remove those realities either, because if you don't have the means, if you don't have the house, if you don't have the food, and you're in a survival, we as a community need to start reevaluating what we are doing wrong. And there's a shit ton of things that society is doing wrong, not to be able to support the most vulnerable. It doesn't make sense to me, right? But that again is a whole other conversation to have. So it's just to just bring light to parents and to adults and caretakers of younger children, that we can only try to build a safe space, right, as much as we can, for them to come back to us as teens and adults. Because maybe I won't talk to you about my experiences, but I hope that you wish that you'd be the phone call at 3 a.m. that your child will make if they need help.
Absolutely.
Right?
Like, keep that porch light on all the time, it kind of a analogy to say for us. And even as we get older, like I bet for you as well, it's a funny thing when you're an adult child, and the work of having a relationship with your parents as an adult. And even before, our caretaking time may begin, it's interesting because it's lots of things that my siblings and I are doing with our parents, and our parents are doing with us now too, about, okay, like, we're all in a different place. And so how do we keep this family sacred? How do we keep a relationship sacred? And how do we figure out that I'm an adult now, you're also an adult, and we have to have this funny relationship? And I think for a lot of our communities, there's a gap for us, because you go to your therapy, and if you don't get a racialized therapist, and if you grow up in the Western world, and only the Western world, there's a huge gap, because we're taught boundaries and cut our parents off and all that stuff that I was told and guilted by so many friends. Like, why do you keep talking about your mom? And then don't be her, don't, I'm like, what the fuck? I can't not have my mom in my life. I'm just trying to get some validation here. And so I always think about our young ones that grow up in the community, and like, how do we bridge that? Because for me, it's been important to have my parents in my life at every stage, as it would be for them. And so, we're figuring out our way of doing that. And so I think that's something for a lot of us to maybe think about too, is like, as an adult, what is my relationship like with my parents, and how did I dream about it to be? How do I want it to be? How would I want my kids to be with me when they're adults?
The generational thing can be definitely hard when you're coming from a space of unlearning and you're realizing everything, right? That, like I said, that emotional exploration and search and all these impacts that it had, which on its own, it's again a privilege. It doesn't remove the suffering or anything that you have, the work that you're putting into to healing. But then you have the elders that are still in that survival mode, and they've never, and it's like you're talking and it's like gibberish to them. They're like, what are you talking about? Intergenerational trauma, right? I got there's like, we call it a ship, the whatchamacallit, the it's not the flip-flop, but the flip-flop.
Oh, yeah, there's like a set. We call it chappal, a chappal.
Chappal?
Yeah.
Chappal, ship in Egypt. So, and they're like, we turned out fine, and they probably had it much worse than we did, but it's like, they're fine, as in they give you love, they care as through food. They don't say, I'm sorry. They, the I love yous are not very common because, again, they do it through food, for example. It's hard because there is that sometimes I find for myself, there is an emotional immaturity, and you're like stuck with, holy shit, like, how do I navigate this now? Because I do so much work. And this is not just with my parents, it's with the 20,000 relationships I have around me. And it's like, I go to therapy. I try to heal. I try to learn. I do research because I want to try to be as knowledgeable as I can for my participants and my benefactors and my clients. And then you're like, you hit a wall with somebody who has ego, or who doesn't want to be vulnerable and is scared to be vulnerable, or, because it's a threat to do so. And it's hard. I find it very hard to be in this awkward space.
Yeah.
Right?
It is. It's like guilt too, because you know better as an adult now. And I can't be a 14-year-old lashing out like, as a 44-year-old. So that's the age I always go to too. And it's like, okay, how do I do this with grace? It's a dance, like you've mentioned before. But at the same time, I think, like you've also said, it's like you have to also recognize what your journey is and where you're at. And sometimes we look to others, whether they're in our community or outside of our community, and the comparison thing isn't necessarily helpful either. So it's like you've been saying, be authentic, try to find who you really are to be able to get some of those answers of, is this a good thing for me to carry this out with the elders?
But it's okay to search for validation. That's where it's hard. And knowing a little bit of what you've told me, I could imagine also for you how isolating it is, right? From the part of your friendships and these relationships. So we don't often look for comparison, but we're looking for these GPS coordinates, because when you can't and you feel like a little bit lost and you don't have these point de repère, like these little spots where you could refer to and feel a little bit of validation, it definitely is very lonely.
It is.
So I do want to acknowledge that too, right? It's not a one and done. Like it's a growing pain for the rest of your life. Once you've opened the door and you're willing to face that part of you, it definitely is a growing pain.
I have a wonderful therapist who I started with last year, and she's also Punjabi, which has been very helpful. And the first 3 sessions were literally me just like bawling. I didn't say anything. And she didn't really say a whole lot too, but she provided the safety to be able to just start there. And, I was like, fuck, that's like a very expensive crying, but it was so necessary. Sometimes when you haven't been given that opportunity, or you don't give it to yourself, it's amazing what you find when you get it, because you're like, oh, that's what I needed. I just needed to sit and cry. I've been watching a lot of Indian, like Bollywood movies, and they could be rom-coms, it could be funny, but from the minute they start till the end, I'm just bawling. And so I've been like writing about that, and like, what is that about? And I think it's just the familiarity, it's the nostalgia, the sounds I grew up with. All my sights are sort of like intact. I'm trying to understand the language and, communicating that to myself and connecting and all this. And I'm like, oh, this is very interesting. And probably I should keep doing it for a while, because I'm finding it's so helpful. It's like you can be happy and sad at the same time, and that's okay. And so it's like being in multiple feelings at once in the healthiest way possible. But it's so funny. I just literally just thought, like, funniest movie I'm watching, but I'm literally sitting there folding laundry, just bawling. And then you think of family, like my grandparents, all these sort of images start to show up of, okay, I get it. I get why I'm doing this, because my grandpa used to listen to music like this in the car. My grandma used to say these kinds, so I don't know. I think when we open the door, there is a lot more than maybe we think that's available for healing, that it can be outside of therapy, but we have to want to look for it too, I think. And that's just, you know, I'm very grateful that I have the privilege and the space to be able to do a lot of these things that I know many people that are in similar boats can't. And so I just don't want to take advantage of that, you know? Like, I'm glad I can use those sorts of moments of healing or whatnot. So funny
No, definitely.
how it comes.
No. But there is an issue in the mental health industry, and people, and I find it so hard because this is where you see the capitalists coming in, and people are like, Carine, you need to charge that $200 an hour. I was like, yeah, the person can afford it, but I'm like, what is the cost? What is the cost? I remember not knowing what was going on. And I think it was the start of my first time I was having anxiety attacks. I was 26 or something, and I was still in university at this point. And I remember calling a mental health office. They were called this of the depression and anxiety. So I called and I'm like, I need help. And the person's like, okay, well, it's going to be 145 an hour. And I was like, I don't have an 145 an hour. I need help. I'm not okay. I'm not okay. And I'm bawling. And the guy's like, well, we could do group support for $90. And I'm like, I'm a student. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I wasn't going to go downtown for help. I wanted to look for something that was local. And I still have this discomfort of, why can't I charge what I want for the person? And people like, do what you want, but you're not going to be able to eat. So there's that capitalism that comes and plays with your mind. And yeah, I'm hustling more. Like, yeah, I have like one job that's a full-time job. I have another contract here. I get to do therapy. So I am a little bit split in four, but also I'm getting to meet all these wonderful people. I'm getting all these wonderful experiences because of that flexibility. And I'm also able to try to promote what to look for in a therapist, especially as a racialized person, because I didn't know what the fuck I was looking for.
Yeah.
I remember the first therapist I went, she was white. It was, again, like maybe 6-7 years ago. And she's like, oh, you're Arab. And I was like, yeah. So I was hanging out with my guy friend. She's like, you're allowed to talk to boys? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, huh, are you Muslim? And I was like, no. She did bring some benefits, but it shouldn't have been to the mental load of, you know, I'm in my feelings, I'm processing something, and then it's just, I'm going to ask her this about her culture so I could understand better. And it's like, but that has nothing to do with, if I said my faith was a problem, then go ahead, ask. It's not. So
Yeah.
It was weird, and it's really hard even for me to find a racialized in a multicultural space. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go do this person. Okay, I'm gonna go do it. So now I'm just at a point where I'm just gonna try different types of therapy so I could recommend what
You're
works for
doing the
people.
research
Like
for us,
this
right?
one, I'm like,
yeah.
I'm just gonna go try neurofeedback. Let me try like psychedelic therapy. Let me go
Yeah.
try this one. Let's see.
Let
You know,
me yeah.
I'm at a point where like I'm like, okay, I've acknowledge I'm still going to get some benefits of hopefully a good therapist, and I get to see what bad therapists are. And I'm sorry, like there is good, there is bad. And that's why I'm saying, like, I've heard stories of people who come to me and I'm like, they've never told you this. They've never told you that. They didn't guide you to this resource. And people are looking at me completely defeated. And they're like, no, is this common knowledge? I'm like, a little bit. Yeah.
I think
And I'm like,
the stats are really high with how many people after their first session, if it doesn't hit right, will never even go back to try again. And so, you know, a big part of why we're talking about this is there has to be trial and error, and it sucks that someone's hurting and they have to go to 16 different therapists. But the hope is that people can find someone or asking us to sort of to recommend. But the other part to that too is if we can get more people of color that are accepted to universities to go to mental health school, that would be really helpful too. But a lot of them are getting denied, rejected. It's unfortunate. And they want to get in because they know there's a gap in their culture and there aren't enough, you know, therapists that can support them. And so I think it's like this fucking vicious circle of you can't find someone because people can't get into school, and you know, all these sorts of things that are going on. And so I really, really hope that if people are looking for talk, you know, and talk therapy is not for everyone, but if people are curious and looking, I hope we can help guide and recommending or sort of doing the work with you to find someone, because it can be beneficial for many of us, and it just sucks that not everyone gets to have that experience.
And it's expensive to again, yes, I do have my university degree, but with time it became extremely performance oriented than it is to became care. And I'm asking, youth are now coming up to me and they're like, so how'd you get accepted? I was like, well, I applied and then I got accepted. Like, I didn't understand the question. They're now having psychometric tests that they have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, why do you need a psychometric test? And they're like, well, this is what you need to do. I was like, no, this is a tool to not allow other people to come in. This is a tool for people who have privilege, and we're removing the grit. There's a woman, I think her name's Angela. I forget her last name. She's this Asian woman, and you could Google her, and she talks about how the grit is a great tool of success, right? I don't have all the scientific terms all the time. I don't know what type of approach. I have to be honest and transparent. But holy shit, like if I'm there and I'm sitting and the first step is talk therapy, let's just open the door to make you feel safe to talk, to make you feel like, okay, I'm here to get it and to support you and to validate you and to guide you. And then we can find these other options. And then I could help you search for something. But for the love of God, don't book an appointment with a therapist who won't give you 20 to 30 minutes of consultation.
Yeah.
That for me is unheard of, because I will not sit there and be like, oh, I'll take $100 and then realize that I might not be the therapist for you. Yeah. That is not okay.
I agree.
So understanding that you are allowed to ask for 20, whatever time they're allowing to. So I give up to 30. I say 20. I know I end up at 30.
My therapist was on, ended up being an hour, and I was like, oh my goodness, and sometimes she would give me more time in our session. And because I come from the mental health field, I had the privilege of supervising therapists. So I understand sometimes therapists don't like to cut it off too. So I kept looking at the time and being like, oh my gosh, you know what? Protecting her. And so she was so good being like, is that what you've been worrying about this whole time? Give that to me. That's my job. I will tell you if I have to go. If I'm here 10 minutes after, it's because I want to be and I can be. And it's so nice to be around people when you do find someone that treats you like a human on the other end and understands, hey, it's, time is fluid, time is relative. We can't always, do it in 40 minutes, but sometimes we can. And I think this is why we continue to talk about the good experiences too, so people can gauge and understand that, okay, we can find someone, it can be possible. But yeah, the consultation, I'm very grateful for all the therapists that are really good at offering that, because people should get to decide, on their own accord that this is something that they want to continue. You're not really going to get any problem solved or goals met if the relationship isn't there with your therapist.
I'm even of, and I don't know if that's, I don't know how it's felt within the mental health, but I'm the one to be like, you can ask your therapist if they go to therapy. I'm for that. I'll tell, sometimes they don't think of asking me, but sometimes I'll be like, oh, I get it. It's not always easy when I go to therapy. And they're like, you go to therapy? I'm like, oh yeah, I do. There's that balance of what authenticity and transparency can look like.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. I'm not going to tell you who it is, when it is, or what it is, but you get to know that part. I get to control what I choose to tell you, but because I know it can be important. It's not your job to care for me.
Yeah.
But I just want you to know that there's another human. I'm not the holder of all truth. I'm not the holder of all. I just have a little bit more experience in this because of my work path. I have a little bit knowledge, but it doesn't mean you don't have the tools also, right? To navigate this life process of yours. And I find it very, very hard to sit in front, either as a patient or have people look at me as if I'm the know-it-all of it all. And I'm like, whoa. Yes, I do have knowledge. I'll do my own research and I'll see if they post any political stances or are not supportive of certain stances. I will not go into that space. I will not go into a space that I find that is not inclusive and positive space for the 2S LGBTQ communities or for the Swana communities or the colored places, because I know what it is and I know what to look for, and not everybody does. And that's what makes it overwhelming and exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to repeat your story and you don't want to do this. And it's understandable. And you're saying, yeah, some people don't go back after the first time, but sometimes it takes 7 times to try to find somebody that's relatively decent.
That's right. Okay, so I'm going to pause us for a second because I want to keep talking to you. And I think what's going to happen is I'm going to invite you back like 1,000 more times to do more conversations.
I love it.
For someone just starting their journey of unlearning and relearning about our health, our sexual health, is there one thing or like a resource or first step you would recommend?
Go from a curiosity, like a childlike curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
You know how a child looks at something and it's new and it's different and it's, it's really innocent. I think that aspect is very important to look at. And it can be hard for some people who might have like different thinking patterns, for example, but it is just to not be so judgmental on yourself or to listen to what others say. It's not to ignore it. It's just to be like, I'm acknowledging this, but I am curious about this other point of view, because right now with the access of internet and the knowledge we have and the TikToks and the Instagrams and all the other fields, we are blessed to be able to go seek the other point of view. Mm. You can't just stick in it. So be curious. You feel uncomfortable, it's because something is happening. It's because a message maybe you were taught about, for example, well, men shouldn't wear pink. Well, what's wrong with pink? Where is that coming from? Are you hearing the male examples in your life? Are you hearing, higher powers at play here that like taught you something that has nothing to do with it? It's okay to feel uncomfortable, but that challenge to go see the other point of view with no judgment and to sit patiently and to absorb it and to process it where it can be would probably be that.
I love it. Before we wrap up, anything that you wish maybe I'd asked you today that I didn't, something you want to go back and clarify or add to?
Honestly, on top of my head, no.
Oh, we did cover
I'm very
a lot.
passionate. Yeah, I'm very passionate. So if ever I think of something afterwards, maybe, but I think it's just really a joy to talk to you and to feel connected to somebody who lives so far. It really makes me want to come to Calgary.
Yes, please.
Be like, can we chill? So at the moment, on top of my head, I don't think of anything. I just want to thank you for having that space and for inviting me for that.
Aww.
So thank you.
I'm grateful that when I reached out to you, you were so quick to respond and were like, yes. And then we had a wonderful video consult. We even started a little like group chat. And so I appreciate all of that because you got a lot of things before I could even bring them out. And I think it's because our journeys are kind of parallel. So, and the other question I had for you too, I don't want to forget, is we do this middle fingers up segment. And so I always ask my guests, is there something that you want to put your middle fingers up to today?
I'm using what came up a lot in this conversation was definitely all the tools of colonization, imperialism, white supremacy. And I think they're all from the same monster in a way. So exactly, it's middle fingers up and much, much more. It's fuck all of that and let's keep decolonizing. That's where I'm coming from.
And then the last part would be call to action. So if there was one thing and only one thing our listeners, viewers took from today, what do you hope they take?
I hope they do take the growth mindset. I definitely hope they do, but also with a lot of compassion and love, not just for themselves. I hope that community building comes back, the deep gritty, the sitting together and doing our food and crying and laughing and those true connections do come back. I really hope that we start the unlearning. The call to action would be definitely be open to learn, be open to sit with the discomfort, be open to cry. I'm still learning to let myself cry. So yeah, I think that's your go. Learn something new every day. You learn something new. One thing every day.
Okay, so where can people find you? I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that want to talk to you more or get some resources. So where's the best place for them to come visit you or ask you questions?
Instagram, because again, I'm a one-person show at the moment, so I don't have a website. So Instagram would be, the handle would be at PRO period nuances, NUANCES. And you can then send me DMs, follow and support a social enterprise. That's what it really is at this point. The more visibility, the more I can give support to people as well.
Yeah. Okay, so for me, I want to thank you so much for this insightful conversation. And that's really what it was so insightful, a beautiful conversation. Didn't feel like an interview, just two friends asking each other things and stuff and connecting in between there. I appreciate the work you're doing. I think a lot of our community, all of our communities are going to benefit. Our future, our kids, our teens are going to benefit from things that maybe we just didn't have access to. And we should, if we can, provide that access. And you're doing just that. And so one more time, let me thank you for your time. It's such a precious thing to have, and you gave me a lot of it. And I want to tell you that I feel very honored to have sat here with you today.
And same to you. I said it. I was like, I would love to come back and even add more people to the conversation. It'd be so interesting to have that.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
We should do that.
Thank you again.
For everyone else that's listening or viewing today, you know, these conversations are door openers, and that's really what they are. We're just starting to have these conversations. So please, please, please reach out, add to this conversation. Tell us what you love. Tell us what you hated. Tell us what made you feel a little bit uncomfortable. All of that is important. We always say we're building our own data, collecting our own research through these conversations. So hearing from you helps our community understand what we need more of and maybe less of. So thank you for being part of this with us, and we look forward to your feedback.